Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have host Michael Nerney and a talk on technology. I'm Jessica Bickford. I'm the coordinator of Healthy Lamoille Valley, and we're a substance abuse prevention coalition working to reduce youth substance misuse and help to support healthy activities in the region. Thank you for coming today. Throughout the last year, we've been having kind of some of these reoccurring conversations around technology and the impacts on our youth. And really, we've come to the right realization that we see a lot of impacts, but none of us are necessarily the experts. And so we really felt like, it would be so great to bring an expert. So Michael Nerney has a wealth of knowledge on youth brain development, and so he's going to share that in a moment. Did want to just share a couple of quick housekeeping things. On your tables, you each have our NOMS form, which is our national outcome measures. It's for our grants, and we wanted to keep our funding coming. So if you could take a moment and just drop it off at the back table on your way out. There's a bowl of fruit and some cookies if you're feeling that mid-afternoon slump and need a little boost. The restrooms are through the back door, and there's water fountains out there, and right around the corner to your right, there's actually a water bubbler with cups, so if you need a drink, take care of it yourself. Michael's notes are up on the Healthy Lamoille Valley website, so this presentation is there already, so that way you can download it. And we also want to thank Green Mountain Public TV for being here today. So they're recording it, so if you're like, what was it? Michael said that so perfectly, how do I say it? You can go back and rewatch it, but also we know there's a few colleagues that weren't able to be here today. So without further ado.
Thanks, Jessica. Thanks a lot. Good. So I do a lot of research on adolescent brain development and what can make it go awry, and including high-risk behavior, which some of the things we'll talk about today blend in both in how brains might change with overexposure or too many hours to some forms, but not all forms, of screen use, and how some of the risks that screen time provides for them can get them to go awry in terms of behavioral function. So my real stuff is around kids and brains. Don't anyone think because we have a thing about technology that I have any skill in the technological aspect about this, because I was saying to one of our participants, my grandson and I play guitar on Sundays, and I was trying to show him, because he's already better than I am, Dire Straits with Mark Knopfler playing the lead on Sultans of Swing, and I had it on my laptop. And he said, why don't we just put it up on the big screen TV, Grandpa? And I said, well, because that's a television, and this is a computer, And 15 seconds later, everything from my laptop is up on the computer because their skill with it, their fluency, and that their adaptability is astounding. I was also talking earlier, Camille and I have a new car that has Bluetooth, which for 2 weeks, we just looked at the icon that told us we could make calls until I took him for a ride and I said, we can talk to people from the car. He's like, give me your phone. He's 11. Give me your phone. He loads all our contacts on it. So this is a brain that, of course, we know young brains learn with great fluency anyway. And we're going to take a look at what are the risks inherent here. And they're not all brain change. Some of the risks are more substantial to me. So depression can be an outcome of attacks across the various lines of screen use. So you can have depression, you can have social anxiety. We have a new category that it may or may not get into DSM-5R called cybercide. The impact of a cyberbullying attack so strong and so powerful that it creates suicides. So those are the things that I have as much anxiety and concern about, as well as does non-ionizing radiation get in and cause tumors in their brains? So we'll try to talk about a big array of it. I prefer, because I came out of an outfit called Narcotic and Drug Research, where our office, my office for 10 years, was in the 2 World Trade Center down in New York City. Of course, those buildings are gone now. But we get to do research on brain development, the impact of drugs and alcohol, and other high-risk behaviors. So my tendency is towards science and not headlines. So what you see on CNN some night about new study on the use of cell phones or smartphones with kids, that may be science, it may not be science. But it's often good clickbait when you're on any of your screens and you're saying, look at this article. So I prefer science. We'll talk about what the science is. For me, part of the distressing issue here is that it's early days in terms of what we have for scientific outcomes. There are 3 wonderful new studies. National Institute of Health is doing one. CDC is doing another one. The University of Wisconsin is doing one. Somebody at the United Kingdom, Wellcome Trust, in the United Kingdom, is looking at 7,000 14 and 15-year-olds who spend excessive time in role play, gameplay online, and looking at changes in their brain. So that's, for me, the gold standard is, can we see something inside your brain that has changed? Now, I love that they're there, but all of those, and there's the ABCD study, which we'll talk about, many of those have 5 years to 9 years to completion. So over time, we'll get information from each study. Here's what we found so far. But we're 9 years away from the National Institute on Health study. That study's on 9 and 10-year-olds. And it's going to tell us a lot. In the meantime, we'll get some tidbits and we'll get some information. And some of it we can use to guide our way forward, not only in terms of our classroom activity and the use of digital devices in our classrooms, but how we might advise parents and what we might talk with parents about. And so that'll be basically what we do today. Anytime you have a question, feel free to ask the question. If it's a long answer, I would prefer, as well as your colleagues would, that you ask me long before 4:25, because if you ask me a 20-minute question, I'll give you a 20-minute answer, and your peers will wait for you in the parking lot and talk to you about your judgment. Camille and I are staying overnight, so we can stay here till 5:30, 6 o'clock, but you probably can't. Ask the questions. If I don't know it, I'll tell you. There's a ton that's unknown. If I do know and it's long, I'll give you a resource. There are some really good resources online, and there are some crummy resources online. So we'll try to make sense out of, particularly when we have some form of imaging system that can detect change in the structural, electrical, chemical, or cellular parts of the brain. So that's what we're going to look for. There's a ton of really good brain studies. Some of them are just delightful. So that if you look at this particular, let me see if this guy does it. If you look at this brain and this brain, they're part of a study on how the brain works at rest. On the right is a male brain, on the left is a female brain. And they take a bunch of them and boil them down to several images. Those studies show us that when the brain is at rest, activity diminishes, but it depends to a large extent on gender. So in this study, they'll put you on this measuring device. They'll say, we're going to watch your brain solve a math problem. They do not care about the math problem. They say, but it takes 1 to 3 minutes for the device to calibrate. Just relax, empty your brain of thoughts, don't think of anything. That's the actual study. So it turns out that when there's lower levels, fewer colors, and they're more broadly spaced, there's a lower level of activity. So as you can see from the men's brain, that men are exceptionally good at not thinking of anything. It's a skill, it's a talent. Whereas this female brain that's loaded up, in fact, has a ton of activity even in the resting stage. So we love the research. We like all of this stuff. We like to see how a 16-year-old male brain, right here. So this is diffusion tensor imaging, DTI. It's unbelievably good every what looks like colored thread in here represents about 20,000 neural pathways. And now we can see where they go, how they connect, how much activity, what's happening in real time, so that you can look at a 16-year-old male brain in real time and have this not only spectacular image, but the realization that there is activity in a 16-year-old male brain, and we can watch it happen. The brand new research that I love the best is about sleep, because now they're looking at brains at nighttime. And of all the many things we're going to talk about that diminish brain function, brain capacity, emotional stability, cognitive function, of all of those today, I'm going to highlight, and I want you to hear it and do your best to convince parents about it, and that is going to be sleep deficits. Because not only do they have them built in to their brain and their life schedule, all of the digital stuff, exacerbates sleep deficiencies in teens, to the point that we have some serious and substantial learning deficits in emotional and a capacity to regulate emotions. So we'll talk about some of the new studies on that. And that's a big outcome. So I love that we can look at things, we can see where they're going. Earlier and earlier we see how young people, these are 8-month-old baby girls, how that's Sarah on the left and Julia on the right, how their brains are wired up here. That's Sarah's mom. She's an MIT professor behind her. And the researchers are looking at how does this 8-month-old brain display empathy, the capacity for empathic response. And they're fascinating studies. One of the outcomes of the digital studies is as follows. Does empathy show up with the same developmental trajectory and the same intensity capacity when these are going to be 18, these two are going to be 18, as it did 20 years ago or 40 years ago? We didn't have the brain research for it. We had a lot of social research on that. So are there empathic capacity changes based on, sending rocket-propelled grenades into the opposing troops, on your Doom game when you're playing with 6 other friends, and have collateral damage when you kill a bunch of civilians in a town square? So those are all really kind of interesting questions, and all of that helps us, gain new information. Some of the same studies on empathic response are based on or are tied to the studies on online bullying. Because does anybody remember, I forget who the researcher was, but the infant stranger studies, they were out of Columbia University down in New York City 25 years ago. So you'd have a room like this, you'd make 8 separations in here, you'd put the mom at a table reading some magazines, and 12 feet away you'd put a bunch of age-appropriate toys for 12 to 14-month-olds. And so some of them were pretty mobile, they'd go over and sit down and play with them. And then the infant stranger study is when one of the psych grad students comes to the door right there, and it's Brian. And so what do we learn from doing that set of studies? That how does this infant know if Brian is safe or not? There's no Brian. Yeah. He looks right at mom. So the first thing that happens is this one says, I know if this is safe for me or not by studying Brian, but by studying my mom's face and her eyes. So if mom smiles and says, Brian, I keep playing. And I might smile, I might look at Brian. If mom is silent and waiting to see who this is, I might get up and come around behind and hold my mom's leg or get behind her, which is what they always often do in situations where they're unsure of whether I'm safe or not. And if mom looks worried, I'll start crying. I'll start crying right now. So one of the really interesting things that we see about the cyberbullying and you guys know the attack apps, the gossip apps, like Rumor and Burn Note. Yik Yak used to be one, but it's been sued out of existence. So those are online gossip stations where someone can be anonymous and they're localized. They're localized meaning the app won't work any further out than a mile. But in this high school, everybody who has that app can go after some single person anonymously, so your name never appears. But you can say the most brutally hurtful things that you can make up in that space when someone else post. So your phone goes bing, you look at it, you puncture up the app, let's say it's Whisper or Ask.fm, punch that app up and you see what Stephanie's wearing today, and then you see a list of comment after comment after comment after comment, all unbelievably cruel. And for me, and most of the research, what's absent in any of that is Stephanie's face and eyes and facial expression and tone of voice. Because if I make a cruel comment to someone about what they're wearing, I will see it register on them. And if I have empathic response, as almost all humans do, I will know that what I said was hurt and it maybe damage my friendship and my relationship, and I will feel, in most cases, remorse about that. There is no facial expression. There's no eyes filling with tears. There's no shaky voice. None of those things are apparent to whoever is transgressing against someone online. So you can do it almost free from remorse. And so there's an array of pretty neutral to aggressive feelings on the people who are jumping in and commenting, but none of those comments are lost on the target. And so we see some really interesting new studies. How will this change the capacity for the human emotion empathic response? Will it change it? How will it change it? What can we do about it? So all of these are things that researchers are looking at, and very seriously, because it's just critically important. This is, none of these things that we have are going back in the bottle. Instagram's not going back in. Snapchat's not going back in. None of those are going back in. And when you have no accountability, when no one can hold you accountable for this thing that you said, libel is true no matter what, then, boy, it frees up a world of often dark attacks. So we know a lot of kids suffer from that, and we'll talk some more about that. You'll see headlines like these all of the time about, are smartphones addicted? Are kids addicted to technology? Are they unable to put their devices down? Here are a few of the headlines. The growing problem with smartphone addiction, smartphone addiction in psychology today, nomophobia, no mobile device. My fear of not having my mobile device as an actual disorder they're positing to be in DSM-5. Yes, I suffer from nomophobia, all the time. No, just when I don't have my phone. This article says it affects 40% of the population. Smartphone addiction could be changing your brain. There's a CNN headline, iPhone separation anxiety makes you dumber. A study out of the University of Missouri. Anybody see the film Screenagers? Oh, okay, that was around for a while, and it was a really interesting film, but short on science. Long on surveys, short on science. And I mentioned it, and FOMO. So what is FOMO? Fear of missing out, exactly. So am I going to suffer from those things? Do I have cell phone addiction? Well, we know they're not addicted to their device, or they'd never get a new device. But they upgrade their devices all the time. And it is clear through the research, not that people are addicted, but it's clear that they are emotionally dependent on the immediacy of the connection to their peers and others. So do we say they're addicted? Not yet. There are, however, a couple of aspects of the digital world where we can see, in fact, brain changes that are just like the brain changes that happen when somebody gets addicted to, say, the liquid nicotine from vaping, or say, cocaine. And those particular aspects are related to excessive online role-playing gaming. When I say excessive, we have 14 and 15-year-olds playing 60 hours a week of online gaming. 60 hours a week, you say. Well, how do they do that and go to school? Well, they don't go to school. So they're truant from school. They're stealing things to get money to buy new products. It's an amazing surge in this, what we believe is an addiction to one aspect of this technology. There's a couple of other aspects. One, we won't have time. Two, we won't have much time to talk about today. So another aspect of online addiction is an absolute addiction to digital pornography, which we're seeing treatment centers open up all across the country for this. And measurable changes, not only in behavior, I mean, just stunning new kinds of, a range of young men who have seen so many bizarre sexual acts repeated and repeated that the normal kind of relational, physical, and sexual excitement when they find a new partner doesn't have any effect on them, and they have erectile dysfunction. 24 years old, you know. And so I always found it as I watched the ads for the ED drugs like Cialis and Viagra, how every couple of years the new set of ads is younger people in the ad. Does anybody remember when Bob Dole used to be the spokesman for? I was like, I take Viagra. You know, so everybody could like, well, that's an old guy. Now they're not. And one of the ones I saw recently is like a middle-aged couple. They're not young, but they're like at a carnival, and the voiceover is, they're walking through a carnival, and the voiceover is like, you know, when you feel that special bond, why wait? Well, how about this? You're at a carnival, okay? Let's start there. You know? It's just like this whole deal. Camille and I have been married for years, and we love each other dearly, but never has an ordinary household moment between us while we're folding the laundry turned into something. I say, did the walls of our house just fall away? She says, no, that's not how you fold those towels. But you look at these changes and you see, because I'm wondering, why are we aiming at this younger demographic? Well, the addiction to digital pornography is changing young men's sexual capacity and function, and their relationships, and their lives, and their marriages, and all of that. So, and the third thing that, again, so these two we don't get to talk about today, the pornography, online gambling. So we're seeing college freshmen flunk out of their college and owe $38,000 to some online gambling site. Now, none of that is illegal in the United States, but there are 3,000 offshore sites, you know, that will take your credit card, you know, and lend you credit, and your parents, if you are 18 or under, your parents will be paying that bill for you. So there's some really interesting things that are going on. A lot of this stuff is, you know, not substantially based in science and addiction, but it does talk about, you know, physical symptoms. So who knows phantom vibration syndrome? Okay, so who can tell us what it is? I'm only guessing. Okay. Because I know when I first got my cell phone, when I didn't have it in my pocket, I thought I had it in my pocket because it vibrated. Is that kind of like? It's kind of like that, yeah. Anybody else heard about it? So phantom, more women than men because of the genes in the hip pocket. So that you're in your garden outside and you brush up against a branch that touches your calf, and you reach for your phone. And you say, hello. You put it back and you step back, and another branch brushes your calf, and you take the phone out. You say, like, well, who's calling me? So that rerouting signals from your lower limbs into your spinal column and up to your brain has occurred, that normal sensations in your lower limb down is almost always the right leg, whatever hip you keep that, whatever pocket you keep that in, that set of neurons will no longer send the signal directly to the brain. That's astounding. You know? So like, you know, you get bit by a snake. What do you like? You know, is the hospital calling me? You know, not yet. And so you have this really interesting stuff. TechNet, what's that? Who's done stuff on their laptop at home? And then at the end of the night, you're like, you know, who knows what selfie stomach is? So, selfie stomach is an inflammation of the intercostal cartilage on your rib cage from extending that arm out as far as you can and inflaming the cartilage over and over again. Seriously, you know. And gamer's thumb. You watch kids play. Well, not only when they text, but when they play, because the handles, you have to be left, right, forward, back, all that stuff. So these are like some of the smartphone addiction syndromes. For us, you know, for me, I shouldn't say for us, the problem with surveys is their self-report. 2/3 of the science around smartphone addiction and smartphone behaviors are surveys. We will do one in the mail. We'll do one online. We'll ask you questions. But we know that people self-report out poorly in terms of accuracy. What do I think the answer should be? If I answer it this way, do I look like I'm weak and unable to be in control of my device? So we know that people, because they're anonymous, and there's no way for us to tell how accurate their response is, then we know that self-reported surveys are pretty poor. Most of the science, quote, you'll read will be about surveys. 1,500 people were surveyed, and if we found this, that 80% of them check their phone 10 times a day. That's not even close to accurate. People check their phone 10 times an hour, but they don't want to say, because it'd be 60 times a day. I would never do that. Yeah, you would, but you're not going to report it out. So we like the studies better, and studies will have, three realms here that will give us some accuracy. The weakest of all studies in terms of, can I draw a conclusion from this, is association. Now you can have stronger association. This often shows up when this is happening. But that doesn't mean anything, then this often shows up when this is happening. Correlations are more like, under this specific set of circumstances, these things are more likely to occur. That's still not causation, but they're correlated. It's a better scientific step, but not proof of anything. And the correlations can be weak or strong, and people often pick out aspects that make them happy about that, and they can get a bigger grant, and they can get more money for it, but it's not necessarily prove anything. Causation is the best, and causation only comes through the gold standard of double-blind studies, and you can tell if it's weak or cause. We can demonstrate that A causes B. We can demonstrate that. So when we talk about, does radiation from your smartphone cause brain tumors, the American Cancer Foundation, the CDC, and a bunch of others say there's not even a weak correlation with that as of yet. Remember, people holding this device up against their ear, that's been 20 years or less that people have been doing that. So we'll see, but right now there's nothing that shows us causation or even weak correlation with that. So we like the gold standard, and we like that when it's double blind, when the researchers don't know what somebody's doing on a game and the people don't know what they're doing on the game. Those are harder to get. We have some studies I'll talk about looking in 154 14-year-old male brains who are playing 50 hours a week or more of online gaming, Doom. There's a bunch of them. Halo, I got a list of them. I can never remember them. Playing those things late into the night, skipping school, having all kinds of social problems, and also having measurable brain changes that are uncharacteristic of that age. Okay. We'll also talk a little bit about the NIH study that says if 9 and 10-year-olds are spending more than 6 hours a day online on screens, there will be a premature thinning of the cortex in those. And so we'll see that premature thinning of the cortex. Those are measurable, and so we start to see like what the potential is for longer-term outcomes. So I don't want anybody to hear me saying that stuff is not addictive. It could be. So, I don't want to be in denial. It's not just a river in Egypt, And we can see some really interesting stuff. Interesting, but not yet, like I said, not yet conclusive. They're studying things that I think are kind of fascinating. So let's take a quick look at this for a second. So what's really interesting about some of the studies on cell phone research and the emotional dependence we talked about is how we're watching the brain. So the new studies, we know that if you have your phone on you and you get just the vibration, that your brain, has an unexpected reward. So say you're on Instagram. This says Facebook. Nobody's on that anymore. But if you say, except old people like me and Camille, so if you're on Instagram and you posted something and someone likes it, you get an actual dopamine release, a chemical of emotional reward in your brain. And I'm going to talk about the UCLA study on kids and likes later on, because it turns out, I can have a device that gives me a reward just by somebody's activity on that. And this whole thing will show you, some of them are pretty funny, because you get a message from a loved one, you expect that to happen, you'll get some dopamine activity. Somebody says, your partner says, I'm going to text you this emoji or whatever, or this picture of us or whatever. You know it's coming when you get the text. See how the dopamine activity happens right in the middle, because you know it's coming. So your brain's ready to be happy about that. If, for example, you have, I'll have to move this up. If, for example, you get a spam thing or some kind of a message that is not what you expected, you hear the phone goes off, you're like, yes, and then it's like, we get a call on the way over here. We do, because we have the phone thing in the car now. We get a call, Camille says hello, someone starts talking in relatively fluent Chinese. We thought, we have no idea who they are, what they're talking about, and so we had the downturn in dopamine, because A, it wasn't anybody we know, and B, we're distressed that someone in China has our phone number, so, without our permission. So you have these really interesting things that are happening in the brain over and over again, and I'll talk a little bit about this, because what do we know? Let me see if I can do this now. What do we know? We know that repeated dopamine activity has a threshold. Now, at a certain point, your brain gets used to it, so you have to find more activities to get more dopamine. That's the big thing with the gaming one. We're pretty sure it's the reason kids are texting late at night and repeatedly checking my phone, check my phone, check my phone, check my phone. Is Mike Pompeo going to text you from Iran, about what's your advice for us, on helping them stay in contact? No, he is not. But it's always over there. We'll talk later about how many kids fall asleep with their cell phone in their hand or on the bed next to them, which is a pretty interesting. Are you addicted to this or not? No, I just have to have it with me everywhere at all times. So I mentioned some of the studies in progress. The Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, the ABCD study, has 4,500 kids, and it's mostly test performance. So it's not a lot of let's look into their brains, but let's try various word tests, memory tests, problem-solving tests. And they're studying 8 to 11-year-olds, and that's got another few years to go on that one. NIH has got a 10-year study on 9 and 10-year-olds. They're using testing and MRIs. So that's the study that already a year in has found that 9 and 10-year-olds who are using more than, I think it's 6 hours a day, are showing premature thinning of the cortex. So that's already an outcome they're seeing. And they're like, don't know what it means exactly, but it's kind of creepy. So a really interesting thing, or 7+ hours a day, really interesting thing is the ABCD study shows that we're not all lost, this is not all terrible, that if you can keep them and get them to self-regulate to under 2 hours a day and they get enough sleep, they end up with the best scores. So you don't have to be a Luddite where there's no digital devices in the house, but all the evidence is pointing out that the more we can delay the onset of this, so the American Academy of Pediatrics just came out with a statement said no screen time for anyone under 18 months, between 18 months and 2 years. No screen time, even television. That if there is any screen time at all, it will be limited to Skype and FaceTime for grandparents, older siblings, blah, blah, blah. So you look at the laptop or the phone, or whatever, when someone else wants to say, how are you doing today, and that kind of thing. But not the play, not the babysitting, not the here, amuse yourself with this device, and don't go outside and play, by the way, or don't ask us to interact with you. So that's the American Academy of Pediatrics. So a lot of interesting things will happen in the future. For the current, there's some real issues for all young people with this. And this Nancy Jo Sales book, American Girls, does anybody know this book? Yeah, so if you have teenage girls, read this book and then go to your doctor and get a prescription for antidepressants. Nancy Jo Sales takes a look at, she has a couple of hundred girls that she interviews and interacts with even more through texting and stuff. And they talk about how distressing it is to be growing up in this country today with particularly the smartphone, they talk about the relentless smartphone calls, signals, demands, the wheedling, the coercion of some form of digital sexual interaction with the 10th grade boys, many of whom they like, find admirable in other ways, may in fact like to date, and are distressed by their behavior on this cell phone. So here are the questions I don't like asking, because a lot of times the group knows the answer, but they make me say it anyway. What is the name for the transmitting of pictures of male genitalia to 10th grade girls? Thank you very much. I sometimes the group stares at me and I'm like, okay, it's dick pics. And they're like, who's dick? And I'm like, okay, whoever has the phone, that's the answer. So, but imagine, okay. Is that all? Yeah, the response back, is that it? But imagine though, you're in the 9th or 10th grade, you're a 9th or 10th grade girl, and this is disturbing to you. And I've had moms tell me, I hear my daughter upset and crying, and she's angry, and I say, what's wrong? She's saying, nothing, you won't understand. And then after an hour, she tells what's wrong, and she shows them. And then the mother says, I'm going to call the state police. And the kids know, please, I beg you not to do this, because that's like throwing me under the state police squad car, the cruiser. What a different world for them. And the dichotomy they have between, I like these kids, or I like this one in particular, and this is what he wants me to do. And I can't stand that intersect. So this is a great book that talks a lot about how hard it is, to have this kind of pressure on you that to a ton is underground, that we don't know about, we don't hear about, they don't talk about. They talk with each other, but there's no adult very often saying, here's a way we can deal with it. Here's how you can manage the emotions about that. Here's the way you can respond to that. Here's a way, so they're on their own in a lot of cases. So there's some really interesting things that are happening here, because this is down to 6 now, the average age of online access, where you can go online and look stuff up and browse and talk to other people and download information, is about 6 years of age now. Some of this data is a little bit old, but I love it that 20%, 1 out of 5 teens has a social media account that their parents don't know about. So the parents around the one they have like, I'm posting a picture of myself studying, but not the picture of myself drinking beer out of a big red plastic cup at some bonfire in one of your farm fields outside of town. So they often have sexual, what do we call Instagram fake multiple identities when you have your own for your parents to look at, but then you have another one? Finstagrams. So Finstagrams are when you pretend, when you have a different name. So you have a different screen name, so your parents will never get a hold of that one. So it's a really interesting thing. You don't have to falsify your age for social media. They'll do whatever you want to get your account or to get this in. And I'll show you later on a site called Omegle. Omegle is Talk to Strangers. It's an anonymous site where you can talk to strangers across the world, not just in the United States. I'm trying to remember, what is it we tell them from the time they're like, 4 weeks old? Oh, don't talk to strangers. Well, here's a site where you can talk to strangers anonymously, and you have to be, they like you to be 13 to download that app. By clicking here, you verify that you're 13. You don't verify anything by clicking here. It's just so they can download your app and then start getting access to your information, by the way. So you have all these really interesting things. Smartphones are the #1 device. And there's a shifting range of what platforms are most popular with kids. Right now, Instagram is way more popular than Facebook. Facebook was popular with kids till all their parents started getting on and sending them messages, a friend request. And the kid's like, don't make me do this, So you'll see a lot of really interesting things. If you're the parent and you're going to get your kid a device that has access to online, you need to know 94% of the kids who have that use it every day. 58% of the kids, the first thing they do upon waking, 58% of the teens, the first thing they do upon waking is look at that device. The first thing. I think it's just so interesting. What a change, 25% of the kids say they have it on almost constantly. Can you have positive apps, negative apps, neutral apps? Sure you can. And if you are involved in it and stay on top of it, but it's hard, you can have a tremendous amount of control over it. So you can decide when texting is done, because you bought the $700 device to give them. B, you're paying for the internet service provider, and the account is in your name. You can have their phone shut off remotely from texting at any time you like. Want it off at 9 o'clock? Set it up. It's off at 9 o'clock. Most parents don't get that, don't understand it, don't know how to use it. And because it's foreign to us in some ways, we basically turn it over to them. But it's critical that parents, I'm just struck by, we would never do anything. We'd never say, like, I don't know how this credit card works. It's got all our financial stuff, and why don't you take it, my 13-year-old, buy the stuff for the house, and anything else you like. We would never do that. But these devices were like, I don't know, it's yours. Don't do anything wrong with it. Don't do anything bad, but without any real parental controls. And there are ways to do that. A lot of these things are basically ways to stay in contact with each other. And we actually know from a good amount of the research that while kids spend more and more time alone and sometimes feel lonely, they do feel connected to their peers when they're online engaging them. So it's pretty interesting. It's a way I stay in touch with them. So there's a couple of studies that say no human can possibly manage more than 150 friends, but some kids will tell you, I have 1,100 friends. No, you don't. Or if you do, you don't know any of them. So it's really interesting. There are education and learning apps. I have never had a kid say to me once, I'm loving that mind maps thing, because it helps me with my testing. We have them download them, or we get them and have them put them on. The kids are like, sure, I'm using it all the time. And maybe some of them do. Here's a few of these. They change over time and get sued out of existence, basically. So Yik Yak. Does anybody remember Yik Yak? So Yik Yak was a horrible, anonymous gossip site where, like I said, was geolocal. So if say 100 kids in this high school had it on their phones, they could all try. And it actually was discovered as a big youth thing when somebody showed one of their teachers, all the comments that somebody had made about that teacher that day and shared with each other. So often somebody will get selected out as the target for the day or the week, and everybody will go after. Those aren't real Uggs. Those are Uggs they got from whatever, Walmart, there's this, there's that, and then just brutally attack that one person. And at some point, someone texts that person saying, oh, there's awful things about you on Yak today. So they would go on and see all of these horrible things, including pictures in some cases, where a young 14-year-old girl, after being about 3 weeks of being the Yak attack target, attempted suicide, was hospitalized, and was released 2 days later. One of the girls who was involved in you can't find out because they're anonymous, took the morning off from school, photographed the girl coming out of the hospital, posted her picture and said, maybe next time she'll kill herself. And over 100 people posted that would be better, and then sent that to this particular kid. So there is an inordinate amount of cruelty when you have the ability to remain anonymous and make that attack. So these are some of them. You can see them if you look at their apps, although some of them, they disguise them with a calculator on top or something. So you guys know Trojan horses. You could put an icon like family pictures, on the front, but underneath it is the real application. You have to hold your hand on the icon for a number of seconds. So we see that some of these are problematic. If you are advising parents, we tell them, I would never turn the car over to any of my 4, we have 4, never turn the car over without an absolute contract. This is what's going to be like. And of course, we know they're going to violate the contract. I'm okay with that because they know when they do, there's already a consequence that we've talked about. So if you choose to violate that contract and keep the car out till 12 o'clock, my second child, my second boy, came home with a speeding ticket. And the first 3 months that he had the car. And it killed me. I said, how did you get a speeding ticket? He said, well, you said I had to be home at 9. So he's going 65 in a 45-mile zone. So not to break the curfew that I set. So this is somehow my fault. and he had his license suspended. And the first 3 months in New York, you get a ticket. That's it. You get 6 months before you can reapply. I was all right with that. I was fine with that. But I just thought it was so funny. There's some troll made me come home at 9 o'clock, and that's why I have the speeding ticket. So I like to have a whole set here that is not their cell phone as the cell phone that you have let them have for the purposes of communication with you and their friends and the digital technology it affords. And if they violate the contract that you have set up, you will take that phone away from them. I do not recommend that. I don't know. So who teaches? What's your policy at the high school? Anybody? Can anybody tell me the cell phone policy at the high school? Yeah. Can you have your phone out? Who teaches anywhere? Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's we don't need to get in the policy discussion. I've just been at schools where if a teacher sees a student with a cell phone out, they confiscate the cell phone. And I tell them when I'm invited to speak, do not do that. Do not do that. You can go on YouTube when you go home tonight and type in pictures of students attacking teachers to get their cell phone back. And some 64-year-old teacher takes a cell phone away, takes 2 steps, and the 15-year-old kid jumps on him from behind, wrestles him to the classroom floor, and takes that phone back. Why would we ask for that? So why, in most cases, if you have a policy, why is that young man going to jump that teacher and get the phone back? If you ever have to take a phone from anyone, and I hope you don't, you say, I have to confiscate that phone, power it down, and lock it. Then bring it up here. When you walk down and take it out of the hand, what are they fearful about? All of the stuff that's on there. And so underneath one of those Trojan horses, they're going to have 120 pictures of young women from your district in a variety of clothed to unclothed poses. And they know how much trouble that's going to be. They'd rather wrestle you to the ground and get that back. So we like the policies to make sense, given what they have. If you're the parent, you'll power it down. I will take it away. You'll get it back in 3 weeks or whatever. We'll lock it in this room. I'm not going to go through it, app by app. So you have these things, and we like them out front and talked about. And they'll all be like, yeah. But I like it to happen, So those are good things to advise parents about, because you can, set the tone. You can set the contract. You can control and regulate when it shuts down. You can review text messages. You can do all of that stuff, and you talk to them about that potential and that capacity, because this is a contract between us for the legitimate and valid purposes of having this. And then you don't turn that over and say, good luck with this device. I hope nothing bad happens. Including, many school districts have one kid has given up their password, and another kid has used their password to send damaging information about someone else, and the kid who gave the password up is in the office getting suspended until you go to the ISP provider and find out where it went. And that takes, depending on how cooperative they are with the local police, that sometimes takes some legal maneuvering. Here's a couple of high-risk apps. We'll talk briefly about these. Omegle, you go on it, you can look at a list, page after page of tiny pictures of people, and you pick somebody in Barcelona, Spain, because you're practicing Spanish in your 9th grade Spanish class, and you click on that, and that person types in, and it says stranger. That person types in Buenos dias, and then when you start typing, it says you on your screen. And you say, oh, Buenos dias, So you can talk in Spanish, whatever. It's all text talking. If you're getting along, you stay on it. Either party at any time can disconnect by choosing another icon or choosing close. Okay. However, if you want to, you can say, and of course, it's anonymous, but about the third question that the stranger will ask you is ASL. So what is ASL? Age, sex, your gender, and your location. So this is all anonymous. I'm Brittany from 11 Birch Lane. In Vermont. In Stowe, Vermont, and I'm 14. So they often will give up information even though it's supposed to be anonymous. Should the texting go well, you can both, at the request almost always of the stranger, who is not a 15-year-old male in high school in Barcelona, but is often a 39-year-old one, at home in his apartment, they will say, do you want to go to video chat? So Omegle has a video chat. So if you both click video chat, you both get to see the other person immediately. And some of what they see is absolutely and completely sexual. Absolutely. And if you are 13, because that's how old you should be on that, you do not get to erase what you see when that person comes up on the screen. And so there's a ton of risk here. So much bad stuff was going on Omegle that our government, it's worldwide, but our government said you have to have monitors on your site to monitor for bad actors and screen them out. So they have some monitors, but they have so few monitors that they have an unmonitored section on Omegle. So here's, I'll make this a little bigger for you. So if you're 13, you're on this, you can immediately go to, if you want, let me come on up. You can go to this section. And it says, because this section is unmonitored, you are more likely to encounter sexual behavior. Let me tell you, you're guaranteed to encounter sexual behavior on that set. And then it'll say right there, as with the rest of Omegle, users are solely responsible for their own behavior. If you are under 18 or prefer not to use this section, press cancel. By pressing OK, you affirm that you are 18 years old. You don't affirm anything by pressing OK. But now you've let them off in terms of any liability. So there's a ton of this kind of stuff going on. There are chat rooms. These are all similar apps that people can go on. And if you're the parent, you might have no idea what those are. Chat roulette, chat random, chat radkiro chat. So all this stuff, dirty roulette. Does anybody think that's like, pictures of roulette games that are not cleaned at the end of the evening? All of this stuff invites them in, and does its best to keep them and then get information from them. So among the things, that we know about, the exposure to pornography and sexual deviance are common threads in the world that's out there for young people. And we see it all the time, and they're often coerced. So if the 10th grade boy who is sending dick pics requests a topless picture back from a 10th grade girl, and he gets that topless picture back, that is then money in the bank for further manipulation. so that you will do this next thing that I will ask you to do. And if you don't do the next thing that I ask you to do, I'm posting this picture of you with no top or whatever. So you have all of this stuff, and this manipulation are often tied together. The compulsive viewing is often about the pornography or about the online gaming. And so we have some really interesting stuff that's filled, with I think, jeopardy for young people, much of it completely underneath our radar. And so that's why you have to you look at their phones, talk about their apps, show me what this does. You have these conversations with them and the involvement with them, which helps us stay at least somewhat connected to that stuff. So let me take a quick pause there. I always feel like, okay, not distressed enough? Let's go on to the next thing. Who has a comment, a question, an observation, a need for medication? That's all right, go ahead. Yeah. Who's got one? Yeah.
I work with the USDA, and one of the programs for educating parents suggests no screen time for, children up to age 2.
Yeah.
Young parents have a very hard time.
I know that. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. So it's not USDA, but also the American Academy of Pediatricians just came out and said exactly the same thing, that the way their brains develop requires our facial tone of voice, eye contact, facial expression for them to figure out emotional connections, the structure of language. All of that has to happen with our interaction, not with some two-dimensional screen. And you can delay the capacity for kids to learn how to read by too much screen time. So there's a ton of really good reasons to do that, but it's such a, here, take this tablet, be quiet, mom's got to do this. And so it's a really, really hard thing to get parents to buy into. And so younger and younger, they have them in their hand, The really other interesting thing is people will talk about, well, they can watch somebody do a skill, little ones can watch somebody tie their shoes or snap up, or do any little kid skill, toddler skill, online, and they can transfer it. There is no research that shows any transfer from digital media for under 3 years old. They have no way of looking at that and saying, oh, wait, I can do that here in my own house, to open up my juice box. No transfer at all. So it's not helpful in any way developmentally, in any way educationally, in any way in terms of emotional or relational aspects. It is only potentially damaging. And yet, there's little programs for them all over the place and little digital devices for them. So somebody else, comment or question? Yeah.
So where are things legally in terms of starting to shape online space and keep it safe?
Well, they're nowhere in some cases. As you well know, you probably know this, that's why you asked the question, there's often layer upon layer upon layer between the app on your phone and the people responsible and profiting from it. And very often, they're in Romania, or they're in the Philippines, or they're in North Korea. And so we have little to no legal access to many of them. Yik Yak got sued enough, that they never lost a case, by the way, but they finally get tired. Two brothers from Hungary, did Yik Yak. They finally got tired enough of it so that they crashed the app. But they went on to do another one, So there's little to no legal consequence for a lot of them. You notice how it'll say, you affirm that you're 18 by clicking on this. So they say, we would never let anybody under 18 on here. They affirmed that they're 18. You can buy prescription drugs. Do you have a doctor's script for this medication? You say yes. In fact, it comes up a yes or no thing. If you click no, it says, you click no, therefore we cannot sell you this medication and ship it to your home. Would you like to retry your response? I don't know. What was the other choice? Yes, You never, some of them will ask you to put your script in, but you never put your script in because your script has your doctor's signature, but more importantly, it has your doctor's DEA control number at the bottom of that script pad, for which they will then take and make 50,000 script pads that they will sell to people who want to write scripts. So finding them and getting through the maze of protective, worldwide internet is extremely difficult. So we're not very far on that. And all that's really come up in our Congress is the net neutrality things. Are we going to give the big people more power? Not are we going to help keep it neutral? Are we going to regulate things? Are we going to make it safer? Are we going to give the big money more power? So we're nowhere, to be honest with that. You can, in local circumstances, you can get, if you have a good lawyer, or if you have a DA who's aggressive enough, you can get a subpoena, get the ISP, find out who did this, find out who did that. But even in most states, when a cyber attack leads to a suicide, even in most states, all you can be charged with is aggravated harassment. So not negligent homicide, not death resulting. So we're a long way from, we're catching up, but we're a long way from it. So that's a great question. So thank you very much, because it is incumbent upon the parents and youth advisors and others to help with this matrix, because it is not going to happen, by virtue of some kind of legislation passed by our Congress. So, all right, let's go ahead. I'd like to talk about this very briefly because it's a really intriguing new thing, a study. It's not a new phenomenon, but I want you to hear about it briefly. All of us, when I was a teenager, and that was in the last century that I was a teenager, I was influenced by what my friends wore and what my friends liked. So if somebody said, I heard this new record, it was a 45. It went on this device, and I heard this, and it's so great. Well, whether it was great or not, I was more likely to like it because two of the kids I liked in the Myers said it was great. So they're not any different. What's fascinating is watching the UCLA study. So the UCLA study is hundreds of teenagers and having them watch a set of photos. Some they took off Instagram, some they composed themselves, and randomly assigning the photos. So can you tell me your first name? Robin, how about yours? Kristen. So Rob would look at the photos, and the A photo would be a picture of a sunset on a lake. It would have 519 likes. You would look at that photo, wouldn't show up until D, and that photo would have 42 likes. So they randomly assigned them to show up in different order with different likes. And what they discovered is that every teen in the study did not look at the photo first, but looked at the likes first. So before they say, will I like the composition, the color, the clarity, the striking imagery, will I like any of that? That's second to seeing how many other people liked it first. If it was liked by more than 250 people, many of them liked it before their eyes, because they're monitoring eye movement, before their eyes went from the like column to the picture of themselves. They're already moving to like it, which is not astounding, but intriguing to me for the following ways. We know kids are influenced by others. It doesn't matter what the composition, because they would like it if it had the most likes. And we know that the response, when they liked a picture that other people liked, they had a momentary increase in dopamine themselves. Yeah, it's beautiful. 600 other people thought so, But two teens, two carols away, saw 29 likes on that same photo and did not like it because they didn't have it. So one of the things about social media anxiety is on Instagram. So Twitter, I have to get the list out and take a look at them. Among the platforms that create the lower levels of anxiety, Twitter's one of them, because you can just do 140 characters and be done. But Instagram often generates higher levels of anxiety. Because when you go on Instagram, and you can get negative responses on Twitter too, but when you go on Instagram, people you don't know, as long as they're in your feed or your friend's feed or whatever, can comment on whatever you posted or whatever picture you put up. So kids will often withhold a brilliantly composed, wonderful picture because they're anxious about how many people will like it. And that's like foreign to me because I like this picture, I'm putting it up. You know? They won't put it up. Now, there are apps now where you can buy likes. So you can buy likes. So you pay $10 a month. The computer, when you post something on Instagram, the computer randomly applies likes to it over the next whatever. You know, so you can get 27 likes, 180, you know, so that your bank does that. So it's all really interesting. Now, I just looked at the time. Okay, so I got to go faster. And so that's one of the things we're worried about, you know. Have you lost your capacity to make judgment yourself? Does it always have to be based on what somebody else does? And will you be fearful about your own activity because you think it won't hold measure in an online world, you know? Really, really kind of interesting. Let me skip over this one. Our big issues in terms of kids' brain development is right here. Will it impact negatively on the way they learn? The answer, yes, it can. Mostly the sleep stuff. Will somebody's emotions be changed to the point of serious a trajectory change in emotional development where someone from the outside shifts chemistry and internal activity in the brain and creates depression, and depression with enough intensity to have suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts, or death by suicide. So that's absolutely happening. And can we, you know, all the stuff about the sexuality, the games, the gambling, the pornography on that. So let's take a look at some of that. The longer you spend on game tasks, the less likely you are to finish any work, particularly homework. Even having the phone by your side. So in several studies now, we can show that the kid is doing anybody doing homework on their laptop who has their smartphone out can turn 2.5 hours of homework into 5.5 hours of homework. So it takes an average of 7 to 9 minutes to respond to, think about, reflect on somebody who texts you. And so listen, see this? Does anybody know what that is? That's a watch. What happens when you check your time on your phone? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what time is it? It is, yeah, this time. Oh, look. So they get a text. Yeah, so they get a text or get it back. It kills their homework time. Not to mention that in middle school, the number one outcome of homework in middle school is family conflict. So that's probably not the educational design we had in mind when we were assigning homework to middle school kids, but the conflicts have escalated since the smartphones came in because they're not doing it. They're doing this, they're doing this. So a lot more family conflict. You have to put that away, finish this, do this, you promise me you do that. They're on their device, and they won't put it away. So we were in New York City over the weekend. We had a wedding to attend, and we were happy. It was Memorial Day, and most of the people left the city. Nonetheless, people are walking down the sidewalk and out into the street, you know, without looking at, you know, the walk signs or the red lights because they have that they're reading or texting at the same time. It's really interesting. A big issue here is sleep deficiency. So we'll talk quite a bit more about that. And we're seeing more anxiety and more depression, particularly with the late night use of social media platforms. So when kids compare their lives to somebody else on Instagram who sent them a brilliant picture of their spring break from the Bahamas in the green blue ocean cove with dolphins kissing the back of their knees, and they were stuck here in Vermont, and they don't understand how carefully curated those pictures are before they go on, and they think everyone's life is better than my life. So we have some really interesting shifts in my satisfaction in my own life and accomplishments based on more time spent on those platforms. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of things. Right now, more than 50% of the kids, we're up to like 58%, spend 30 to 40 hours a week on video games. More boys than girls. Girls too, but Fortnite, Call of Duty, Doom, all of that stuff, more boys than girls. For the boys, a lot of the role-playing games that have multiple player platforms, you can play with a kid who's 7 houses away because he's annoying when he's in person, But he's great to have on your team with you when you're bombing a castle or doing this. So those are really, really popular. And the more they play, the more likely it will change their sleep patterns. So let's see here. If you have a phone that allows you texting, these days almost every phone does. If you have a phone, 87% of the kids who have a phone and text fall asleep with their phone in their hand or on their bed every night or under their pillow. Yeah. Some of them will put it, or the parents will when they come in, take the phone and put it on the nightstand. But unless they've used the app to turn the interrupter screen. So when a message comes, even if you're sleeping, it goes on the table, and the light comes on and you don't answer it, it fades to blue usually before it goes back to dormant. So we know the blue light interferes with the production of melatonin, a compound in the brain that is a precursor to the mood chemical serotonin. So at night when we're sleeping in a dark room, we make the greatest amounts of melatonin. Blue light has a bigger interference. Now, our youngest daughter, when I was talking to her about that, she's like, I know that, Dad. That's why I have an app that makes my phone, when it goes to hibernation, it's orange or pink or something like that. So her phone doesn't turn blue, in between. It still lights up. And so we know that light comes through their eyelids. So what do we know? Here, let me go back here. More stage 2 sleep. Stage 2 is when your physical rest. We need 3 and 4 to help clear the brain of the day's activity. And we need 5, since 5 is the part of sleep that helps our brain, clean out broken proteins in the brain, all the debris from the whole day's length, and that's REM stage 5, and get that brain ready for learning new stuff the next day. All stages are interfered with, and you end up with sometimes a full cycle short. So there's usually 5 cycles. Kids who text, usually after 10 o'clock, are getting somewhere between 5 and 6 hours of sleep a night. But they need 9 hours, a minimum of 9 hours. So we know that sleep is a really, really big problem here, and continues, to be probably instrumental in lower levels of recall, memory, problem solving, and mood state when they go to school. So if you use your tablet, an iPod, your phone, anything, it takes longer to fall asleep, you feel less sleepy at night, more tired during the daytime, lower levels of melatonin, shorter REM cycles, which mean often sleep deficiencies. So we want them, and we want parents to work better on sleep with them. Look, are there people in here who are, I should talk about this. We always say 8 hours of sleep is what we should have, but that's not the case. That's an average. Are there genetic short sleepers in here? Can somebody in here wake up after 7 hours of sleep, wake up by yourself, and wake up kind of happy? Anybody like that? Don't put your hands up. Other people will be angry and resentful of you. Kind of happy. Are there genetic longs? If you get 9 hours of sleep, you wake up by yourself and you're happy when you wake up. Any genetic longs? Okay, so in the middle are other people. Genetic short teens, they don't need 7. They need 9 hours of sleep a night. Genetic longs need 11 hours of sleep a night. The latest research is 1 out of 5 kids is getting the right amount of sleep in the United States. What time does the bus come? So if the bus comes at 6:40, the crazy part is the little ones who have this different sleep cycle. Little ones, it's 7:50, you bring them upstairs, your 3rd grader, they're like, and don't forget, Mommy, we're going on a field trip to the apple orchard tomorrow, and Miss Wilson said that, boom, they're gone, At 10 minutes to 6, they're like, to bring a raincoat, because even if it rains, we're going on that. They're awake. But that's not teenage brains. Teenage brains have a different sleep cycle that's been cycled ahead. So normally, it's 10:30, the brain's spinning around, 11 o'clock spinning around, but we're getting them up at 6 o'clock for classes. A dozen states are now starting high schools at 9 o'clock and having not just better outcomes cognitively, fewer fights, fewer detentions, fewer things in the morning. Okay, so what do we want? We want fewer disruptions to their sleep, and right now smartphones are a major disruption, particularly if they're texting after 9 or 10 o'clock. And the only reason I mention this is that even unbelievably smart people, like young doctors in their first rotation, when they're assigned to the ER because they're a new resident at a hospital and would get the 40 hours in a row shift, the studies on that show us 80% of the fatal errors come in the last 10 hours of their shift. Now, no state lets them do that anymore. And then for a while, they said, okay, you're going to be on 40 hours, but you can take naps. In the first 8 to 12 minutes after they wake up, 80% of the fatal diagnostic errors occurred. So in the old days, if a bus rolled over and you were on it, you were brought to the hospital, your first question was, their question was like, how are you doing? Your question was like, how long have you been on duty? Oh, I took a nap. When was that? Because you had a chance of being killed by the inability to apply their medical training based on sleep deficiency in that brain. No hospital lets them do that anymore because it was too dangerous. So we want, our kids to get more sleep, and right now, right at the top, besides the demands of sports and homework, so you turn homework into a midnight task by having a cell phone next to you. You turn your brain into something that you can't go to sleep by texting your friends after 10 o'clock. All of that puts them at significant high risk. Now, I'm going to show you a slide in a minute to talk about. So what do we know? Double-digit drop in memory and problem solving, attentional deficits, more problematic behaviors and hostility, coming in late, missing homework, lower levels of class participation. All those are pretty common. Now, look, I want you to see this because this is, and when we say something is an association, how do we rate that in terms of science? As the lowest kind of scientific credibility. But here is the Journal of Youth and Adolescence saying every hour of lost sleep is associated with an increased risk, 23% more likely to get involved in substance abuse, 38% feeling sad and hopeless, 42% considering suicide, and 58% attempting suicide. Those are kind of correlates in a way because depressed teens in particular have a struggle staying asleep. So they're early rising, falling asleep problems. So they're not independent of each other. So 9 hours of sleep or more, 6.5 hours is average or less. So we really like anybody involved in this field to try to help kids find sleep strategies, kids and parents. If you're coaching, one of the big things if you're a coach is what time are you going to bed at night? How are you going to bed at night? Tell me, they keep a log. The good coaches really, really work on this because they know how critical it is, not just for academics, so you stay eligible, but for coordination, for motivation, for judgment in the game. So anytime we can help young people by giving strategies to parents, counselors, school administrators to focus on getting the 9th to 8 through graduate school, the right amount of sleep is critical for those. So we like to see that happen. We still find out that books work better even on the best digital devices. So nobody knows this for sure. We think tactility has something to do with it. You can pick it up, you can carry it with you, you can bring it everywhere. You can look back through the pages so that it's more than two-dimensional. We think that has an impact on better recall of plot. All these are true. Better recall of plot, characters, overall content, higher levels of engagement, more empathic response for the characters, all through the physical materials of reading as opposed to the digital, the tablets and stuff like that. I think it's really fascinating. So when I say not universal, not every study has found that. 9 out of 10 have found it. So you always have one. You have to throw those in too, because somebody at Stony Brook University, those people. No. Stony Brook University, they said it didn't make any difference. Are kids in any, schools or places where the kids are taking all their notes on tablets? So I find it fascinating because we know you can type faster than you can write. 33 words per minute compared to 22. However, You know, all the learning functions, recall concepts and vocabulary are higher, substantially higher when you write stuff. You know. So it's really interesting. So not every school has found that by digitizing everything, they've gotten better academic outcomes. And in fact, there are a couple of burgeoning studies that talk about how does digital technology dumb down your classroom. You know, why does anybody have to remember anymore? I don't have to remember anymore. You know why? Siri remembers for me. No, we don't have Siri or Alexa or anything. But we don't have to remember anything anymore because you can ask Google or ask someone else. But memory is a critical function for academic success and life success. All right, let's talk about this. So this is a short thing about video games, and I'm going to keep it short because this is another one where the big arguments are, but not the science. So when everybody says, like, oh my God, video games are terrible, in fact, on the left-hand side, you know, you see some things that are pretty negative. On the right-hand side, kids who play a lot, so one of our daughters plays Legend of Zelda. Is that the one? So and she's having me play it, you know, and then she's watching me. She sees stuff coming in on that screen. One pixel moves over and right, and she's like, watch out, Dad. This guy's going to jump in here and shoot you. You know, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Better eye-hand coordination, improved detail awareness, greater resiliency. Their characters get killed. They play the game again and bring their characters back to life. So they learn how to deal with failure. You know, on the left-hand side, if particularly you're playing violent video games, there is a greater likelihood of more arguments, lower empathy, more hostility. However, what the studies found out when they looked at it in a greater context is that personality characteristics and game dynamics play a role. The first study published that said we had 240 kids play violent video games and they exhibited higher levels of violence and hostility was, if you looked at the methodology, was a study in a Texas youth detention center for kids with antisocial behaviors. What a surprise, you know. They had higher levels of hostility. They have that already, you know. So what does this chart show us? That when kids are high, are effective altruists, when they're high on agreeableness, when they're well-intentioned, they have an extremely low likelihood of any video game changing them or making them more violent or hostile or anything. When kids are high on neuroticism, when they're temperamental, when they're low in agreeableness, you know, those kids have a much higher potential for video games. They're already, based on their personality characteristics, more likely to have negative outcomes from that. So it isn't just the game. It's the game, the circumstance, and a lot of other things. For some kids, we know risk-taking is a huge normal outcome of adolescent growth and development. So some of them are going to go on sites we don't want them to go on. And some of them are going to send dick pics to somebody else. Some of them are going to send a message to a 10th grade girl, send me this picture of you. And it's not all deviant and not all, terrible young people of the day. It's the excitement of risk-taking. We know that that happens also with the piling on and the bullying also. So not every kid who's using these things is bad to the core, but it's easy to get swept up in these things. I might want to skip out. Here it is, right here. However, for those games, which are risk-taking games, your character is going to get killed. This is going to happen. For boys in particular, the big visuals, the cooperation and competition. My team of 5 is going to attack this castle and kill all those people. So you have all the things that boys often like. For that, what we're seeing for some, though, is that a change in the brain where they need more and more time and higher level attacks, where when they don't get to play, they suffer both emotional and behavioral withdrawal. When they can't go to sleep at night. So we have freshmen in colleges playing these games till 3 or 4 in the morning and not going to their first period class at all, their first class, or even their second class. 40% in the big schools right now, Texas A&M, University of Michigan, 40% of the freshmen are not coming back for their second year. And a lot of the school student life is saying, Here's one of the big reasons right here. More for males than females. This particular study was on 154 boys who, as they looked at what was going on in their brains, that 154 boys study showed measurable change. Now, they were playing in between 40 and 50 hours a week. They were skipping school. They were truant. They were getting in trouble. Some of them had been kicked out by their parents and moved to the cousin's house, the uncle's house. Those boys showed measurable changes in a part of the brain called the ventral striatum. And that part of the brain is a huge component of our reward sites. So when you're 14, a million things should be running in it to give you rewards. Coaches, I'm starting you this weekend. If you're a 14-year-old boy, somebody you like says like, oh, I like that outfit you're wearing today. Somebody else says, can you come to our party? All of those things, your 5-year-old sister runs up and hugs you and says, I love you, Darren. All of those things should be generating reward in that brain. It's all those paths get shut down, and only the path that's based on the gaming activity is lighting the brain up. So when they are forced to quit, they go through withdrawal, and some of them, so we had a couple of calls at the house after I did one of these things. One was from a mom who's a 14-year-old boy, and I checked with the middle school. There was no significant pathology before this. No hostility towards adults, no this, no that. This kid was skipping school, getting on the bus. His mom would put him on the bus, going 3 stops, jumping off the bus and going to the house of another kid, where another kid came over, and the 3 of them played these games all day. Failing 9th grade. He's not going to 10th grade. The attendance cops are looking for him, twice a week. The parents are being called in. They finally get advice. They go online, look for advice. The advice is shut off Wi-Fi. So they shut off Wi-Fi. The kid steals the key. The mom, her mother, lives 4 houses down and goes to Florida for the winter. Steals the key to the grandmother's house, meets his friends there at 1 o'clock in the morning. 1 o'clock in the morning, it's Wednesday. Finally, the cops, some neighbor calls up because there's lights on in Mrs. Ryan's house, and they go, and the kids are in there. There's food all over the place. They're playing these games. So they arrest them all, They put new locks in the grandmother's house. The parents turn off the Wi-Fi. The second night, the boy comes in, turns the lights on at 2 o'clock in the morning, has a butcher knife from the kitchen, and says, you'll turn the Wi-Fi on tomorrow night. I will come in here and kill both of you with this light. Honest to God, that is not the first call I've gotten like that. So what used to be, we would say, well, you're going to threaten to kill somebody for your heroin, or for your methamphetamine. Here are kids threatening their parents. I'll get kicked out of the house. I'll flunk out of school. Because what is a key element of addiction that I don't care what the consequence is, I will not give up doing this. So I said, you got to call these people. He's got to go. He's got to go to there's already treatment centers that are residential for teens that are unable to stop their interaction with this because it's addicting. So when we talk about what's addicting and what's not, the real issue here for us is that there are some things that are absolutely like that, and that we think those things have the biggest risk. So I'm going to wrap it up here. Like I talked about, the risk for learning, particularly sleep, huge issue for that. The risk for damage to each other through the bullying stuff, and the too much comparison. Everyone else's life is so much better than mine. And the risk for what we believe is the biggest brain change risk here is based on the gaming, although NIH is saying the premature thinning of the cortex means you lose some fluency of learning. So we don't like to see thinning of the cortex till 21, 22, 23, when we're grown-ups and we're less likely to learn anything new. But when you're 10, you have to have, that brain has to be full force. I can learn everything because I have almost this unlimited capacity. And these are distressing changes that we're seeing. So the jury's still out. There's no doubt that this stuff can have an impact that's negative if it's unchecked. So all of the indicators are that if we keep a lid on it, minimize the time, less than 2 hours a day, interspersed with other activities, go outside and play, and then, when you're not doing that, it is unlikely to disrupt a young brain. If we don't do that, for some of them, there's much greater likelihood that this will have a negative impact on physical, social, emotional, and cognitive development. That make sense? Download this. There's a few more slides that I didn't get to. You'll see them. They're pretty self-explanatory. Who has the question that will gain you the ire of your colleagues? Yeah. So particularly, so here's a great deal. If you have 14-year-old brains, because they're so remarkably, unbelievably flexible in their neurology, you can have some pretty high-grade return. We think that brain can come back to normal function over a matter of time. And this is the case is true even with drugs and alcohol. Now, the problem with the alcohol is some of the damage might be long-term damage. But even from other drugs, this brain has remarkable capacity for recovery. However, somebody has to address it. So it's unlikely that somebody in here who's gaming all this time is going to suddenly wake up and say, like, look at my life, what a disaster it is. The intervention is usually an important intervention. Something else from anybody? So Camille and I will be hanging around for a little bit while we close out. If you have a question, come on up. Thank you for coming out on a nice afternoon in Vermont and listening. Thanks.